Hi, my name is Daria. I teach Intro to Rigging and Rigging Automation at AnimSchool. I'm a technical artist, technical animator, a rigger, also a tools engineer, and I currently work at an AI company called Unique, and I previously worked in feature animation at Laika. I worked at various game companies, worked a bit in visual effects, and this is an interview I did for AnimSchool. I hope you enjoy it. Yeah, so actually I didn't know anything about rigging until I came to United States and started studying it. I wanted to work in animation and visual effects, but I didn't really know about the different disciplines and what's the difference between them. But then in school, I took some kind of introductory classes and rigging was taught in one of those classes. So that kind of drew my attention to it. And I saw that there is a combination of both it being technical and artistic, and that kind of really appealed to me. So then the rest is history, basically. I didn't just work in animation. So I started actually working in video games. I worked at some small video game companies. Then I worked at a company that kind of did a little bit of everything. They did visual effects. They also did some theme park things. So I worked there for a bit. And then I worked in animation at Laika. And after that, I worked at some tech companies. So I feel like I'm lucky that I tried a little bit of everything and how rigging kind of is in different industries. So I came in there when they were working on box trolls. So I worked at the end of that. I mostly worked on Kuba and the Two Strings, and I left during the next film. Yeah, so what we did there is, so they have a department which is called Rapid Prototyping Department. And that department works on just facial animation and facial rigging. So what happens there is that all the body is animated kind of by hand in stop motion way, very classical stop motion way. But then the faces are animated in CG, kind of the same way as they would be animated at any other studio that does just computer graphics animation. But then all those faces that are animated in CG, they're then 3D printed. So if you know about replacement animation, so kind of the old school stop motion way would be to sculpt different faces, different expressions, and then just replace them on the armature, on the character in the scene. But then Laika is taking that a step further. And what they're doing is they're 3D printing those faces. So almost every frame, it's not really every frame, but very many frames they can print out and just place on the characters. That way it feels very, I guess, seamless and very fluid, the way animation happens. If you look at some of the older stop motion films, like let's say Nightmare Before Christmas, when you see Jack Skellington singing something or saying something, you can see that the facial animation is a bit choppy. And that's because they hand sculpted all of those faces. And of course you can't hand sculpt a lot of nuances and to make it very fluid, how the motion goes from one frame to the other. But with 3D printing, you can do that because you can basically 3D print the way the animation happens in CG. Yeah, so I think I first got into rigging, well, I studied it at school. But then the first jobs where I really got some rigging experience were those small video game companies. And then at Laika, I actually switched from rigging into doing more of engineering and programming related things, because I started there as a rigger, but then I went to the engineering department. And so I was writing tools for like 3D printing related pipeline. So one of the examples would be different things that are used to kind of transfer the model onto the 3D printer to get it printed. A lot of those were related to kind of how rigging is happening and how the models are being passed to the rigger, and then how the rigged character is being passed to the animator. Like some of the tools were, for instance, to pass the way the character is rigged onto the servers so that the rigging can happen kind of on the farm. Some of those were just creating automatic ways to check for model intersections, things like that. So there were lots of things that could help with how we can review the model before it gets printed, how we can rig it faster before it gets printed or before the animators can start animating it. It's definitely, it used to be a bit different when I started. So I started working in industry at around 2009 or so, 2010. And at that point, there were, I feel, riggers who weren't very kind of programming savvy. But now it's changing quite a bit, I feel. So because in companies, there is little rigging done by hand. So a lot of times when a rigger starts in a project, they mostly create tools that help with rigging so that then all the rigging can happen automatically. So I think now more and more it's almost a required skill. But then it's very different per company. So I have friends who work at different companies and they say they don't really do any programming, like they're not allowed almost to write any tools because there's a department that does that. They're just supposed to be using those tools. So it's very different. So there are places that don't require it, but I think it's a very good skill to have regardless. No, not really. Well, it helps. Again, so there are, in some places, riggers do a lot of blend shape sculpting or corrective shape sculpting. For that, it really helps to know modeling. I'm not very good at modeling, so I'm more of an example of being on a more technical side of it, but it's different per company. But then also AnimSchool teaches modeling and rigging, but they also have a rigging automation class where we do all that tool writing. Actually, I like that class a lot, just because I see how much students improve in that class and all the great work they do. So in that class, students write a tool of their own design from beginning of the class until the end. And they work on this tool continuously at home, and then at class we review how they're working on it. And they can choose a tool that they want. It just needs to be a tool that helps with automating some part of 3D pipeline. Most people choose to write an auto rigger, so automating a creation of a rig, of automating the rigging of the character, but they can choose any other aspect as well. And in class itself, we go through important programming concepts. So they don't need to know any programming when they start the class, but we learn, so we talk a little bit about MEL, mostly about Python, and we talk about all the concepts like, I don't know, writing loops, variables, classes, functions, all those things they learn in that class. And we do a lot of practice with different concepts. There are like small exercises that we do both in class and at home. And then all of that they use to write their own tool. So the reason why I like it also is that a lot of the tools that people have created in that class, they are really good tools. They can put them up somewhere, like they can put them up on GitHub, and then companies can notice those tools and decide, oh, wow, the person who wrote that tool, we would want them in our company, we would want them to write similar tools. So I think that class, you're right, it's not talked about. I feel like not talked about enough and could use more attention. Oh, not at all. Yeah, you can both take that class or any other class without knowing any programming. It's not expected. In fact, if they know too much programming, then they might be bored in a class. But if they know a little bit, that's fine too, because the concepts that we learn, they are applicable specifically to not even just to rigging, but to all parts of 3D process. So yeah, in fact, I think it's not just riggers who could take that class and could benefit from that class. Modelers and animators could take it too, because there are cases when animators write some tools at companies where they work at. And in fact, it sometimes happens where, let's say the animation department is being laid off, but there's some person who wrote this tool. Oh, let's keep them so they can finish writing that tool for our company. So I've seen that happen. So I think it's a very valuable skill to not just riggers, but to animators and modelers too. Yeah, you have a good point there, because, and I was the same way. I thought it's like just for animation or games or visual effects. But that's actually kind of a small field. There are not that many feature animation companies, so there are not enough riggers or animators or modelers to go there. So yeah, I think other fields are very interesting. And yes, so I worked in robotics. And before now, I work at the company that does more of an AI related things. But yeah, at the robotics company, what we did was we had a team of animators, and they animated a robot in Maya, which we modeled in Maya and rigged in Maya. And so the animators created their animations, and then we exported that animation onto the robot. And so what I did there was, so my position was a tools engineer. So I wrote tools for Maya to help both animators create their animations and to help us export those animations onto the robot and to see them being on the physical device. And that was really fun for me, because like that was an application I never before thought rigging and scripting can be used for, especially with 3D. It's like a gap between 3D and real world. So that was just so much fun. A lot of things were transferable because it's still working with the same software, and there's still rigging involved, and there's still programming, the same type of programming involved. Lots of things are different because, so this time it's working for a technical company with very technical focus. So in that case, well, a lot of differences, for example, on that job were very specific to the project. So there are a lot of nuances that you have to think about when exporting animation onto a physical thing. But I can, so if talking about why I switched, that was kind of just the opportunity came my way. I saw the job. A friend of mine kind of called me in, suggested, said that they were looking for someone to write tools for Maya, and it looked like a really, really cool and innovative thing. So it was interesting for me to try something new, something kind of out of my comfort zone. So I thought it was, yeah, I definitely don't regret switching. But I also don't think that there's something that it's superior to animation industry or the other way around. I think both industries are great, and yeah, so I think it's just different things work for different people. Yeah, I think different people are very different. There are some people who really want to get into, let's say, feature film, or really want to get into visual effects. But there are some that just say, okay, I just want to get a job doing this. I don't care where, or I care where, but I'm open to different things. And I also think both are fine. I think it's fine to have like one goal in mind and strive for it. But it's important to remember that sometimes not meeting that goal might not be dependent on you. It might also be just dependent on luck, because there are so many people who try, let's say, to get a certain job position at Pixar. And your work might be really good, but your resume might not even be noticed. So that's why I think it's good to have an open mind, but it's also okay to have a certain goal and a certain dream. Yeah, so there are lots of things. One of them, I think it's important to have kind of an attention to detail and look at references, do things like that. Also, I think it's important to be kind of open to different ideas and to different approaches. So students who take my class, so right now I teach intro to rigging class, and it's okay if they take it and then let's say they go to intermediate class and they learn it a different way. I don't want them to just stick to my way and say, well, Daria taught us this way, so we're going to just do it like that. Because when I taught intermediate class, sometimes people would come to me from intro to rigging class and they were kind of very stuck on the way they were taught something in the intro to rigging class. But I think it's important to kind of see all the different approaches and to try different approaches as well. I also think one important thing, especially when starting a job, is to understand that not everything is going to be perfect at a studio. that you start in. So a lot of times I feel like when people start working somewhere, they expect like, oh, this is a feature animation studio, or this is a big company. They're going to have like perfect rigs and they're going to have perfect tools for me to work with. But of course, it's not like that. And especially if they're hiring you, it's probably they're in the crunch time. The movie needs to be released in like 3 months and they just want to get things done and they just need to get things done fast. So of course, they're going to be like duct taped things here and there. And of course, you can't have like perfect everything, perfect code or perfect rig. So I think that's an important thing also to remember, that when you kind of go in to a new studio or even on a project, like let's say if you're doing project with a friend or something, you shouldn't come in and say, oh, this is not how I learned it in school. This is not a proper way of doing things. Yeah, so I think it's important to understand that. I think one thing important is to not be afraid to fail. So a lot of times I see students who, let's say they will get a bad grade or somehow they will see they made a mistake and then they will kind of start working less and less and they will get discouraged. So I try to emphasize to students that don't get discouraged, don't even pay a lot of attention to grades or anything. Like it's okay to make mistakes, to fail. I think what differs people who do succeed from what I see than people who don't is people who, like, even when they don't create something perfect or even when they make mistakes, they go in and they redo them and they kind of work on it over and over again until they get it right. And I think that's, like, in a way, it's a joy of starting something new because you can be bad at it. Like once you do it for a while, you usually are not that bad at it, or you don't make as many mistakes. So you don't have a chance to do that anymore, but you can only be bad at something once. So enjoy it. I think it's a mixture of both. I think it suits best people who are a little bit of both. But again, I think if someone is just very technical and not artistic at all, they can pick up the artistic side. And if there is some person who is very artistic and feels like they're not technical at all, they can pick up the technical side of it too. So it's good to have a bit of both, but I don't think it's a requirement to have them. Well, I feel like there are a lot of people who say like, oh, I'm not technical. Oh, I don't want to look at it. But in reality, there is not really such thing as like technical or not technical, because if you think about it, like back, I don't know, 20 years ago, when not many people had internet or computer, like a lot of people said, oh, you're using computer. Wow, you must be like really technical, even if you're opening like a Word document there. But now, obviously, like people are checking their emails, getting their groceries, and we don't say, wow, you're so technical. And I think it's like that a lot of times with rigging, or let's say with animation, a lot of animators say, oh, I'm not technical. But then you see them use Graph Editor, you see them use a 3D application, and then you say, well, you are technical enough, I guess, to use that. So I think people, like a lot of times, they need to get past that, past kind of the thinking that, oh, I'm not this or I'm not that, and just try to learn it as if they were to learn, I don't know, a new iPhone application or something. I feel like a lot of times people who I think could be good riggers, like they have a good eye for, let's say, how deformations work in a character. They say, oh, but I'm too technical for rigging. I wouldn't be able to pick up all this programming and such. But a lot of times they could, they just haven't really tried properly. Not really. I think they need to be, like with any discipline, they need to be hardworking. Just because, especially with rigging, a lot of times you start doing something and something breaks, and you need to just to know that, okay, maybe this thing I need to redo. Maybe I need to check what happened this time, and when I redo this, I need to not to repeat this thing again. So that just requires time but you can't get away with anywhere without that. Like for animation, you also need the same thing. You need a lot of time to like try and polish your skills. The same thing with modeling or visual art or with anything. So I don't think rigging in that regard is much different, and you need some kind of different traits than you would need for any other profession or discipline. That I'm not sure about, because I haven't been hunting, like I haven't been kind of straight out of school for a while. So I'm not sure. It was easier. I think it is easier to get a job as a rigger than it is as, let's say, an animator, because just less people are doing it. Another good thing is that if you're getting more into like the technical side of rigging, write tools, do more programming, then if you decide so, if you decide like maybe even later on, you can switch from animation industry into a different industry more easily than, let's say, an animator would. So I think that's a good thing too, is that I think this discipline is a bit more a bit more flexible in terms of jobs. I think it's kind of similar, like the main notes are similar, to keep it short, to have lots of different examples from different projects. So not just target like all the work from one company or something, or from one project. It's good to have variety. For rigging specifically, it's good to have variety of different rigs. So not just like all bipeds or all quadrupeds. So a little bit of different things. It's good to have some example for rigging. It's good to have some examples of programming to show like, oh, this is the tool I made. This is how it works. So I think that's always good. Yeah, that's an interesting point. So you do definitely find yourself being in kind of male-dominated groups a lot. Like at my current job in my team, for instance, I'm the only woman. So that happens. I think, again, even like not that long ago, even like 5 years ago, or like 6-7 years ago, it used to be felt a lot more. Like I think like I felt like there was a little bit of kind of under the rug sexism going on here and there. Now, to be honest, I'm not seeing it as much anymore. Maybe it's just because I'm lucky at my current job. I'm not seeing any kind of different treatment. I think I'm being treated very well. It might be also because I'm getting higher in my I don't know, experience. And so maybe that has something to do with it too. But yeah, I have to say, I have noticed some of it, but I'm not really seeing it right now for myself. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist, or that there are people who are not experiencing, like we hear a lot of stories from different companies. And yeah, of course, that's horrible. And we should do everything we can to prevent that. But again, that hasn't been my experience, at least recently. I think it should influence the decision to pursue it, because if we have more women, then it will be like a more diverse and more comfortable environment for everyone. I think it definitely, in my experience, in teams and in companies where you see more women, it's always, and just more diversity in general, more ethnical diversity, more gender diversity, it just creates more ideas and more comfort for everyone. Oh, that's my favorite thing, just to see how people improve, like from knowing nothing into like creating things, creating rigs, creating tools. That's just great. And yeah, you see people, I think it's all, at the end, it all boils down to how much time and effort people put. Because the people who you see put kind of the most time, or who have the most passion for something, they improve a lot, and seeing that improvement is amazing. Like with rigging automation class, there are people who come in who don't know any programming in the beginning. They ask kind of questions that are maybe could be considered very simple, but it's always very good. that they ask questions, and those are always very good questions, because if you don't understand anything, if you don't understand something, it's always good to ask. And then you see those people who maybe were even worse than their peers in the beginning, then they become better than everyone else, and that's just so great to see. But yeah, I think like through asking questions, through like trying to get into the bottom of something, they progress a lot, and those people create like great tools and great rigs. So that's always amazing to see. Well, I think AnimSchool is really good at what they do, not just my classes, just all classes in general. It's a nice system where you can listen to the lecture, and it's nice that the lectures are being read for students so that they can interrupt the instructor whenever they want. And this is kind of the deal I make with my students in the beginning. That, okay, if you don't understand something, if something is like too slow or too fast, just interrupt me, ask the question. It's totally fine. And I always tell them, okay, you can interrupt me even mid-sentence if you want to, because I'd rather spend a little more time, but make sure that everyone understands the concept, than go over and like get, I don't know, 10 years of rigging into one class. I think that's the big benefit of AnimSchool, because a lot of other online schools, they just have like pre-recorded videos that you watch. But I think it's nice to be able to like say, wait a second, what was that again? Why did you do that? Can you explain that a little differently? I think that's the big benefit of AnimSchool. And of course, the reviews, the fact that we have one class a week as a lecture class, one class a week a review class, those reviews, I think, are very beneficial for students too, because during that class, we just look at each student's work, and it's a kind of a critique of their work. And just the professionals that work at AnimSchool, they're all great. I love to watch some of the videos from other classes. It's just so educational. Oh, well, because my friend my friend is teaching here, Lou. Yeah, he I think we were just chatting at some point, and he mentioned it, and I thought, oh, teaching, that sounds interesting. So he passed my information, and yeah, and that's why I'm here. Oh, I love it a lot. I didn't expect to like it as much as I did, but I like a lot to see how people grow during the class. And I really like to learn things kind of from students, because students, so sometimes they will ask a question that will make me think differently about the concept that I would do something automatically, or I would fall into certain design patterns that I didn't even realize I'm falling into. But then they would stop and say, wait, why is that done this way? And you have to stop yourself and think, yeah, why do I do it this way? And that makes you kind of see the same thing you've always looked at, but from a different angle. And that's a really great experience. And sometimes they even bring up things like, oh, Maya has this new feature, and I never even heard of this feature, like, because it just came out. And that makes me kind of have to go in and look into that feature and see if it's useful or not, and like talk to people. Wait, have you seen this feature? Have you used it? And then kind of come back to my students and decide whether to talk about this feature further or not. But that's really great, because those kind of things I might not have even noticed them if my students wouldn't have mentioned them.